Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com, and the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 102, Summer at Baker Street.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Welcome once again, or for the first time, depending on how you got here, to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And together we wipe the sweat off of our brows, our collective brows, and bid you a fond hello summer and goodbye summer. It's speeding past us so quickly.
Oh, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for it to go yet.
Oh, I know. But summer's a great season. You know, it's that one season that everyone looks forward to. You know, kind of burned in our childhood from 3 months off of school and running around footloose and fancy-free, barefoot through the neighborhood, staying out late until the dinner bell is rung, mosquitoes biting you without fear of Zika virus. The good old days, in other words.
The good old days.
You know, where you could only get malaria, not Zika. When I was a kid. Good Lord.
Good Lord, indeed. I wonder what Holmes did when he was a child in those summer days in the family seat in what is current scholarship considered to be the Holmes family seat? He was from the north, wasn't he? Supposed to be?
From Yorkshire, from I think Riding, Yorkshire.
Right, the North Ridings of Yorkshire. So I wonder what it. You know, I can't imagine that his mother, around whom there's been a lot of speculation, ever said to him, "Sherlock, before you go outside, put on some sunscreen."
And don't forget your cigarette case.
That's right. That's right. You're only 13 years old, so take the small cigarette case. I say, Meta, they've not invented sunscreen yet. What's an SPF?
Well, we have the famous and first biography of Sherlock Holmes by William S. Baring Gould called Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street.
Here.
From 1962. He does touch a little bit on Sherlock's childhood.
Really? I've got to go pull that off the shelf.
It says Sherlock was a day boy at the board school. He did not flourish there, but gained a deep respect for it. In the winter of 1865 to 66, Sherlock was ill, spending months in the attic bedroom, which was his dormitory. When he was a convalescent, his father, by odd chance, gave him to read The Martyrdom of Man by Winwood Reade. It's a sad work, and its conclusions may well have depressed young Sherlock. In any case, he never forgot the book. Recommended it to Watson in 1888. And then, seemingly recovered from his illness, which was very severe, Sherlock was taken by his parents to the farmstead of Mycroft in Yorkshire. There for a year, he was a day boy at the grammar school in a neighboring town, an ancient and quiet place. Those were comparatively happy days. Well, you know, when we all think back to summers of our childhood, they were comparative happy days. You know, you don't seem to remember at least what my kids are going through now, the extreme boredom of having, quote unquote, nothing to do.
Oh.
When the friends aren't around and they're at their wits' end trying to come up with something to do, or the anxiety-ridden emotions that come to the surface as the weeks dwindle down and the school year gets closer and closer. You don't seem to remember that for me. You tend to remember, chasing after the ice cream truck and running through the sprinkler and other things of childhood. So.
Oh, no, I remember that. I remember that great joy in June of thinking this vast period, my goodness, 2.5 months, lay before me to do all sorts of fun things. And then I remember the sad dread of sort of the middle of August realizing,
Yeah.
But, I wonder if in Yorkshire, it's not clear if young Sherlock for summer either went west to Barrow-in-Furness or Ulverston and paddled around the water, or went east to Hull. And near Hull, of course, is a town called Grimsby. Not Grimesby, but Grimsby.
That could be. Well, I don't know about you, and this is a little foreshadowing to our topic here, but for me, one of the grand memories of summer was going to the library with my mom and coming home with just a stack of books. And, in between being outside in the pool or going to the beach or whatever, just devouring books one after another throughout the summer, and just looking forward to that weekly trip to the library where the pile would be returned and replenished week on week.
Yeah. Well, going to the library was a big part of my life, but not particular. I mean, in the summer, sure, but my memories of the summer are mostly things like going to the beach, going to the shore, going to Cape Cod, paddling around, sand.
Well, we do want to get into summer as it relates to Sherlock Holmes, but I think first we need to pause for this important message from our sponsor.
Everyone knows that Egbert, king of the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, conquered Surrey, Sussex, Kent, Essex, and Mercia in the 8th century, a tradition of strong leadership that continues today at the Wessex Press with Steve Doyle and Mark Gagan. Their full catalog of almost 50 items awaits you at wessexpress.com. It's a blended, splendid catalog that includes pastiches, essays, annotations, plays, recordings, anthologies, and more, all curated by Sherlockians for Sherlockians. These should be days for sleeping late, sand beneath our feet, and reeds gold and pink in the summer light. For your secret holiday, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
Well, as you know, earlier this summer, the Norwegian explorers held their triennial conference called The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes, hosted at the University of Minnesota, where the Sherlock Holmes collections lie. And of course, if you haven't listened to episode 67 yet with Tim Johnson, who is the curator of the special collections out there, go and give a listen to that right now. ihose.co/ihose67. But in the meantime, we weren't able to physically be at the conference this year, much to our great chagrin. However, we do have a group of roving correspondents that from time to time pop up and bring along their little recording devices. And in this case, one Steve Mason, longtime listener, cross-country listener, volunteered his services to be the man on the street.
We are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, attending the Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes. This is the latest conference co-hosted by the University of Minnesota and the Norwegian Explorers Society. Every 3 years, they put on a fascinating conference, and this one was no exception. Approximately 140 attendees have been exposed to a diverse set of presentations, which have been both entertaining and informative. Topics that have included things such as the historical perspective on who really does own Sherlock Holmes, the cinematic presence of Sherlock Holmes, of course, good and bad, pollution in Victorian London, the pitfalls of chronologies in trying to develop a timeline, and a host of other subjects. Bill Mason kicked off the event with an excellent and irreverent view on pastiches and parodies. I was able to pull a couple of the people aside to get their thoughts on the conference itself. Okay, we are speaking with Tim Johnson now, who is the curator of the Sherlock Holmes collection here at the University of Minnesota. Tim, if you can give us just a brief interview of what goes on with the collection and how y'all fit into this conference.
The collection, we fit in by providing an exhibit in line with the theme. So whatever the theme is for each of the conferences, we have designed exhibits over the years that fit into those themes. It's given us a great opportunity to showcase the collection, bring out things that people don't often see. One of the thrills for me this year with this conference and the exhibit is one of the comments I've heard maybe most often is I'm seeing things I've never seen before, and I love it when we can do that for people to showcase some really amazing items from the collections. Well, it's really a collection of collections. So the very first piece that came in was a small book collection that was purchased from James Araldi, who was a Baker Street irregular. The idea was to have the library acquire a small collection of first editions, and I think there was a little bit of a conspiracy between E.W. McDermott, who was a former university librarian and at that time was volunteering in the Special Collections and Rare Books department, and I think he might have whispered in Austin McLean's ear, who was the curator, wouldn't it be nice to have a nice group of first editions in the collection? And so Araldi's collection was available. The university purchased it. That was 1974, I believe, which is an interesting year, too, because that's right in the ballpark. Nicholas Meyer's book has come out and the movie. And so there's, I think, a rising interest at that point, too, with Sherlock Holmes. And then 4 years later, the heavens kind of opened up when the Hench collection was given to the university by Mary Kaler Hench, the widow of Dr. Philip Hench. Together, they had built this phenomenal collection that included the 4 Beatons Christmas annuals, original manuscript pages from The Hound of the Baskervilles, some original artwork from Frederick Dorr Steele. So it was a really amazing collection. That came in 1978, and I think from that moment on, the Sherlockian world started to wonder what's going on in Minneapolis, and we've just continued to build on it since then.
And obviously it grew even larger with the addition of the John Bennett Shaw collection.
Yeah, it took a huge bump when John actually came here to look at the Hench material, was very impressed by what he saw and how it was being cared for and how it was being used. And thankfully he was open to the possibility. He had no connections with the university. He was a Notre Dame alum, but the university started talking to him. He was invited to give some talks about Sherlock Holmes, and at the same time talks about what was going to happen with his collection, and he decided it should come here. And then he turned right around and became an ambassador for the collection and started talking to his friends too, saying, in effect, my collection's coming to Minnesota, and I think yours should too. And so John and his collection and his person are huge parts of our history in the collections here at Minnesota.
Approximately how many items do you think you have currently in the entire collection?
I was thinking about that walking over to the hotel this morning, actually, because it's a question we're asked often. We say 60,000 as a number that we kind of put out there for PR purposes. I think that's a very conservative number. It also depends on how you count items, because if you started counting up all the pieces of paper we have in there, John Bennett Shaw's collection alone, easily 60,000. But that's the number we use. We could probably pick a higher number, and we'd still be in the ballpark.
And if somebody wants to do research on any item in the collection, how do they do that research?
Great question. Generally speaking, people will often call me or email me ahead of time. I will direct them to both the online catalog where they can search, and they can limit their search for books and periodicals just to the Sherlock Holmes collection, or they can search through our archival database for the finding aids for the Holmes collection. Once they get on site, and if they've emailed me ahead of time with their list of material, we'll be ready for them, but they'll get a brief orientation about how the library works and how we handle these special and rare materials. After they've signed in and gotten that orientation, they'll go into the reading room, they'll sign in there and be given a table, and then they're welcome to camp out there for as long as they want, and we'll continue to bring materials up from the cavern to them, whatever they're interested in seeing.
We are now interviewing Monica Schmidt, who runs the Younger Stanfords of Iowa City, and she gave a wonderful presentation that we want to ask her some questions about. So, Monica, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what was the subject of your talk?
I did a DSM-5, which would be the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders. I did a DSM-5 diagnostic analysis of Sherlock Holmes's cocaine usage in the canon. And what gave you this idea to do this type of a talk? Late night at O'Lunny's during BSI weekend 2014, Jim Cox and I were talking about addiction because I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, and he mentioned that, well, maybe I should do a paper delineating whether or not Holmes actually was an addict by current diagnostic standards, because I spent a lot of time lamenting the idea that there are a lot of people who have opinions, but not necessarily educated opinions upon the subject.
And what conclusions did you reach after doing all your research?
You might have to read the BSJ for that, just because Steve Rothman did accept the paper. But a preview of coming attractions, I made a pretty good argument that Sherlock Holmes does meet the diagnostic standards for cocaine use disorder severe. And even though as a clinician I don't use the term addict, it's more of a colloquial term than it is a clinical term. That's more or less the equivalent of someone who is an addict.
Without giving away any spoiler alerts, was there anything that you discovered in all your research that kind of startled you or surprised that you weren't expecting?
I think when I originally took on this subject, I thought I had a better recollection, or at least I thought I had a better recollection of the amount of passages that mention cocaine or drug use within the canon. What I discovered is that it's actually far more limited, but considering the amount of pop culture focus on it in television shows and cinema, one would think that the subject of drug use would be a little more pervasive within the canon. It's really not. It's highly limited.
And I noticed that when you were giving the talk, too, that I thought it had been mentioned many more times, too. And we now have Julie McCurris, who is the leading force behind the entire conference. About how long do y'all spend working on the conference itself?
We actually started immediately after the last one. Started talking about the speakers, started talking about a theme, which of course is your driving motivator there. And the really intensive work has been the past year, because that's when you start having to get the details. And as we all know, the devil is in the details. We had a committee of about 10 people, some of them with more responsibilities as others, as any committee functions.
Are you starting plans for the next conference?
You know, I'm going to use this in my closing remarks, but last night I got an email from Gary Thaden telling me, I thought about what might be a good theme for the next one in 2019, and I'm thinking of having him committed, just for even starting to think about it yet. But yeah, we'll start. I'm so glad it has turned out so well. And when you look at something that, I feel justified in calling it a success because everybody looks happy. But you realize in order for anything to be successful, yes, you can have a committee, you can organize it, but without good speakers, such as yourself, Mr. Mason, and without a good audience, it just will not be successful. And we have been very, very fortunate to have that combination meet so well. So we'll hope for the next one in 2019 be just as much fun as this one was.
We hear the waves crashing on the shore. That's summer.
Oh, is that what that is?
Really, the waves crash on the shore year-round, but,
I thought
not at the shore to hear it year-round.
I thought it was more bad news about the ice caps.
What? I don't know what you mean, Bert. Well, summertime in the canon, you don't really think of summertime when it comes to the Sherlock Holmes stories. And yet, as it would happen, 25%, a little over 25% of the stories took place in the summer, which, when there's 4 seasons, that seems to be a pretty good ratio, right? And I think we mentioned this in our show about the spring, that you don't typically think of the warmer weather with regard to the canon. You tend to think of fog in London and, the autumn season in particular. But 16 out of the 60 stories were set sometime in the summer months, June, July, and August. And in some cases, they were just quoted as being in, quote-unquote, the summer, without the chronologist even being able to identify specifically what the month or day was. But for me, personally, I have a great connection of Sherlock Holmes and the summer because, frankly, that's where when I discovered Sherlock Holmes for the first time, at least in book form.
Oh, really?
Took one of the aforementioned trips to the library, took out this fairly thick book, and I don't remember the exact title, but it was a collection of Sherlock Holmes stories that began with A Study in Scarlet. And I remember taking that book with me to Newport, Rhode Island, and just immersing myself in it and really just losing myself in the book for the first half, and then suddenly having this rude awakening of being in the desert in Utah. Did someone switch out the books here? I'm not quite seeing the connection here, and sticking with it. And by the end of the novel, just being completely enamored with the character, which then led me to go back to school in the fall, write a research paper, and meet people like Tyke and Teddy Niver, and the rest is history. So for me, summer and Sherlock Holmes is inextricably linked as far as, my origin story.
Well, let's turn it now. How old were you when this was happening, roughly?
I must have been about 14, I think.
Huh.
So fairly late to come to the Sherlock Holmes stories, but impactful nonetheless. Yeah. How about you? Do you have summertime memories of Sherlock Holmes?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. With the exception of being at Gillette Castle, for a while the Cornishars in Rhode Island would have 2 meetings a year, and for a while we were having joint meetings with the men on the tour, and we were lucky enough to get into Gillette Castle in Connecticut, in Hadlime, Connecticut, when Don Grant of blessed memory was the managing director or the director of Gillette Castle. When Gillette passed away, he left his estate on top of the Seventh Sister Mountain to his heirs, and that didn't work out very well, and it eventually became a state park. But in those days, we were actually able to hold meetings inside the castle, sitting at his dining table and actually having cocktails and things like that. And so I remember a couple of those wonderful meetings at Gillette Castle, and then for another wonderful, I think that was a joint meeting with the men on the tour, we also took the Essex steam train. Chris Steinbrunner, in those days, brought old films and a 16-millimeter sound projector, so we rented the entire Essex steam train and had a meeting on the train which featured Chris screening Terror by Night, which is the Rathbone Bruce picture.
That's great. On
a train, and that was just a wonderful. So I remember things like that, Science Society meetings in the summer months, which were wonderful.
Well, and of course, William Gillette's birthday is still celebrated July 24th of every year. which was one of the excuses that the men on the tour would have for getting together at the castle.
Oh, right.
And, your mention of Gillette leaving the castle to his heirs and eventually becoming a state park. I love the paragraph from his will where he stated, "I would consider it more than unfortunate for me should I find myself doomed after death to a continued consciousness of the behavior of mankind on this planet, to discover that the stone walls and towers and fireplaces of my home, founded at every point on the solid rock of Connecticut, that my railway line with its bridges, trestles, tunnels through solid rock and stone culverts and underpasses, all built in every particular for permanence, so far as there is such a thing, that my locomotives and cars constructed in the safest and most efficient mechanical principles, that these and many other things of a like nature should reveal themselves to me as in the possession of some blithering saphead who had no conception of where he is or with what's surrounded." And in 1943, the Connecticut state government bought the property. And as we know, there are no blithering sapheads in government.
No.
Well, when you think about the stories, just off the top of your head, if I said, think about the Sherlock Holmes stories that occurred in the summer, what are some of the ones that you could pull from memory?
Oh, boy. Well, from memory, without doing any research, none.
Yeah, come on. Come on.
But,
there's a couple to me that come to mind, really.
Well, the engineer's thumb is, I suppose, the only one that really...
Really? Why is that? Because that doesn't come to mind for me. I want to hear from you. Why?
Well, I'm not the best one to ask because on the back of my Sherlockian card, I have listed the Baring-Gould chronology of all the stories in terms of when they started. So,
it's a brilliant card, by the way.
Well,
it's a reference guide.
Yeah, thank you. But and thanks to Bill Baring-Gould. But I, tend to look at that list for those digits. But I remember, the Paget illustrations, and so these are people who are walking around without coats, and I don't remember any stories in which the heat of the summer looms large.
I do.
Which one?
I remember two in particular. One is the opening of the cardboard box. Not the opening of the box itself, but the opening of the story. And there's a couple of things that strike me from that one. I remember Watson mentioning that Baker Street was like an oven that day, and the heat reflecting off of the brick from the houses opposite. And just thinking in my mind how uncomfortable life in the summertime would have been in those days without, the convenience of air conditioning that we know today. When they wore those heavy clothes, the wool. Although I will say, one of the Granada productions, and I think it was the Naval Treaty, featured Jeremy Brett in a wonderful cream linen suit, Tom Wolfe-like in nature. And I thought, well, that's remarkable. We rarely, if ever, see Holmes in that kind of garb. And of course, to survive the summer months, they must have dressed a little more in more breathable material and more lightweight material, some cotton or some linen or what have you. And I just thought it was a wonderful and just a minor detail in that production that reminded you that, yes, this story was taking place in the summer. The cardboard box was one that stands out to me as one of those summertime stories. And Watson laying on the sofa and trying to beat the heat, basically.
I'd forgotten that. You're absolutely right. Yeah. That's a good one.
The other was Black Peter, which was one of the stories that was squarely identified in 1895. This is from the Return of Sherlock Holmes, and it was July of 1895. And the thing I remember about that was, and part of this memory is burned into my brain from the audio production from the BBC radio series because of the sound effects. But the description I still remember of, I think it was it Bradstreet? Who was the inspector in that one. Stanley Hopkins. It was Stanley Hopkins in Black Peter, where he described the scene of what happened at the shack. And he said, I have fairly steady nerves, as you know, Mr. Holmes, but I give you my word that I got a shake when I put my head into that little house. It was droning like a harmonium with the flies and blue bottles, and the floor and walls were like a slaughterhouse. And, of course, then he goes on to say, there in the middle of it was the man himself, his face twisted like a lost soul in torment. His great brindled beard stuck upwards in agony. Right through his broad breast, a steel harpoon had been driven, and it had sunk deep into the wood of the wall behind him. He was pinned like a beetle on a card. And I just think, can you imagine in the midst of July, all those flies buzzing around and the gore and the heat that must have been, it just sticks in my mind as one of the most horrific scenes in the canon. So those two in particular are the summertime stories that stuck out to me just off of memory.
Yeah, the only one, not having gone back and looked at them lately, the only other one that sticks to my mind is Lion's Mane, because I remember Holmes is walking on the beach.
Of course.
When what's-his-name comes running up to him. Wasn't it McPherson?
McPherson, yeah, about like stackers.
Science teacher, yeah.
Sounds like an opportunity for Sherlock Holmes brand swim trunks. Not a Speedo. Let's hope it's not a Speedo.
Oh, I like that. Sherlock Holmes brand swimming costume.
But, back to your reference of the engineer's thumb, one of the things that I think this was a Hounds of the Internet discussion we had years ago, because Hatherley showed up at Watson's place missing a thumb.
Ow.
And he described, I got to go, ow. He described how he was hanging by the ledge and how Colonel Lysander Stark, hacked at it with a cleaver, and how the thumb was basically left on the windowsill there. And then, of course, after the machinery malfunctioned and the house burned down, someone in this online discussion that we had, they said, can you imagine going through the rubble of the house there and finding the thumb still stuck to the windowsill like a burned sausage sticks to a pan? Oh, that's an interesting...
It's an interesting simile there.
Visual, yeah. But that was happening, of course, in the heat of the summer.
Yeah.
Now, some of the other stories that you may not have realized occurred during the summer, Man with the Twisted Lip. There was Neville Sinclair for days in captivity there at the Bow Street police station, not showering. Right? It was Holmes to the rescue with the water and the sponge.
Right.
And you have to imagine, after a few summer days in a jail cell, that Sinclair must have been overly eager to receive that sponge and water and cleanse himself.
And then I remember, obviously his last bow has that opening in which we're told it takes place in the most terrible August.
Yeah, August of 1914. And I didn't realize this either. The Six Napoleons took place in July or August of 1900, by most chronologists' assessment. And, I think again to the blood on Horace Harker's doorstep and how it had to be swilled down with buckets of water. And again, how unsavory that must have been in the summer air in London.
It's funny, though, that other than Cardboard Box, which you rightly point out has a lot of color painted around the temperature in Baker Street, there isn't much action or event that happens in the stories that is directly influenced by weather, which is odd, particularly considering Conan Doyle was such an outdoors kind of a guy. He's always playing cricket, riding his bicycle in the winter on skis.
Yeah.
Holmes and Watson never go to a cricket match.
That would have been funny.
It would have been funny. It's probably good, because they would just be sitting there with a picnic hamper for an hour and a half, for a day and a half, and avoiding anything going on in Baker Street. Unless somebody had been murdered on the pitch, that would have been something.
Well, and to further matters in the cardboard box, part of the plot of how Jim Browner was able to pull off the murder, it also involved the weather. Because you recall his wife and her beloved were out in a rowboat, and he approached them unseen through the mist and was able to sneak up on them that way. I don't recall if it was mist or fog. Was it? Maybe it was fog. It was just as if they had been given into my hands. There was a bit of haze, and you could not see more than a few hundred yards. I hired a boat for myself, and I pulled after them. I could see the blur of their craft. The haze was like a curtain all around us, and there were we three in the middle of it. So kind of that humid and hazy weather adding to Browner's ability to get away with murder. And, of course, when he sent the ears, preserved in salt, which would have helped in the warm weather, I certainly didn't send them on ice. But I do remember that Paget drawing of Holmes with the plank across his knees, Watson on one side, and I think it was Lestrade on the other. And there Holmes is wearing a boater.
Oh,
and I think that's the only instance that we have of Sherlock Holmes wearing a straw boater. So again, adding to that summertime flair. Well, lots of stories to explore in the summer. Why don't you make a reading list, your summertime reading list of all of the stories that took place in the summer. We will add all of these titles. We're not going to go over them now, but we'll add all these titles to the show notes. You can read through the stories that took place in the summer months in Baker Street.
25% of the canon should be very doable between now and Labor Day.
Not a labor at all.
No. Friends, the sun is a terrifying ball of fire only 150 million kilometers away. That's why, before you head to the beach, you need the new Sherlock Holmes brand swimming costume. Inspired by our Victorian ancestors, our black knee-length wool dresses for women feature long black stockings and lace-up bathing slippers. For the men, a black and white knee-length cotton jersey with working buttons and an optional white linen fez. They're the only bathing costumes that deliver the 3 C's. Complete, cosmic, covering. Friends, don't be fooled by a puny bottle of sunscreen. Hide from deadly rays and radiation in style with the Sherlock Holmes brand swimming costume, available at your local Sherlock Holmes brand retailer today.
Well, this is the first time we've had to sit down and record and reflect on our 100th episode, and there was a lot of great feedback. We saw the episode shared far and wide, and lots of people came out of the woodwork to wish us well and to celebrate with us, because this was really a celebration of the totality of everything that our fans and our guests and our readers online have contributed to the show and the site up until this time. And I think it was really well received. And even though it was, we mentioned what our longest show was up until then on the show. And ironically, that show became
the longest show,
even longer, right? So it clocked in at over 2 hours, but by gosh, you folks stayed with us and you listened and you had some great memories as well.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. And I was just last week at the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes with Susan Rice and Mickey Fromkin. And a whole bunch of our pals were there. Michael Quigley had come up, and Lindsay was there, and, just a whole...
Lindsay Fay from the Baker Street Babes?
Yes, yeah. Oh, we just had a lovely chat. She is just the best. I got a lot of very positive feedback from that assemblage about the show. Chris Zordan and others. I mean, they made a lot of very friendly and warm comments about the 100th episode.
That's great. Yeah, I was a little self-conscious about moving into it because I thought, well, is this too navel-gazing? Is it too meta? But I think the collective the collective memories that we shared and the journey that we've had is really a marvelous thing. And I think it serves us well to stop and reflect every now and then rather than to just keep going through these motions.
Yeah, well, I do too. And 9 years, it doesn't seem like 9 years. It really just seems like about 8.5 to me.
My mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems. Give me work. Give me the most abstruse cryptogram, the most intricate analysis, and I'm in my proper atmosphere. Then I can dispense with artificial stimulants. But I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave mental exaltation.
Welcome to the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere quiz program called Mental Exaltation. If you've ever listened to NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, you'll be familiar with our format, but just in case you haven't, here's how it works. Each episode, we post a qualifying question on our website, ihearofsherlock.com, and of all of the correct answers submitted, we select one individual at random to become the contestant on Mental Exaltation. And this time around, our contestant is Eric Deckers from Orlando, Florida. Eric, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, how long have you been a Sherlockian, or have you at least been interested in Sherlock Holmes?
I've been interested in Sherlock Holmes ever since I was a kid, and we had to read one of the stories in the 6th grade.
Oh.
But I've not been an avid Sherlockian the way you and Bert are until I met you once and started listening to your podcast and realized there's a whole world of people who are, obsessed with Sherlock Holmes, and I've had fun exploring that whole world. So about 2 years.
Well, that's great. So do you remember still what that 6th grade story was?
I don't. That's been many years ago.
Well, that's okay.
I want to, oh gosh. And so, here I am on the quiz show. I can't remember the name of the story. It was the one where Holmes had to play being sick, because he had been given a box that had a poison dart or needle in it.
The Dying Detective.
That's the one. And,
wow.
I read that when I was 11.
That's an odd one. Was it a school assignment or you just picked up the book or what?
It was in a literature book, our English book. And I was in the advanced reading group, and that was the story that they had in there. And I thought, who are these people that, I've heard of Sherlock Holmes on TV, but I didn't know there were stories about him.
Well, that's not a very popular story to insert into, kind of an English textbook introducing children to Sherlock Holmes. Usually you'll see, like the Red-Headed League or A Scandal in Bohemia or the Speckled Band, something along the lines of one of the more, shall we say, mainstream stories. That's kind of off the beaten path.
But I also remember that it made me realize there's more out there. I got the sense that I had sort of picked up a book in a long string of adventures.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad it led you down the path, and I'm glad our paths eventually crossed. I remember I was in Logan Airport one time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, you never know. You never know. So, we are here to play Mental Exaltation, our quiz program. I need to ask you if you are ready and all warmed up.
I am.
Okay. Well, seeing that you're in Florida, you don't really have a choice but to be all warmed up. And the good news is all three of our questions relate to summer in the canon, which is the topic of our show this episode.
Shall the examination proceed? Yes, let it proceed by all means.
So, here we go. Question 1. In what case does Watson experience a shock during the summer? Is it A, In The Greek Interpreter, when Holmes astonishes Watson by disclosing the existence of his brother Mycroft one day after tea on a summer evening? Is it B, in Charles Augustus Milverton, when Holmes announces that his sister is planning to marry a plumber at the end of the summer? Or C, in The Engineer's Thumb, when Victor Hatherley, a hydraulic engineer, mistakes his severed thumb for a summer sausage and accidentally eats it?
I don't know how many times I've done C, but I'm going to have to go with...
Really?
Oh, sure. If I had $1 for every time, I'd have $2. But I will go with A.
That is correct. That is when Watson was absolutely astounded to discover that Holmes, in fact, had a brother, let alone had a living brother in London, less than a couple of miles away. So very well done. The second question, not too dissimilar from Florida. One characteristic in English summer is rain. According to Wikipedia, there are 2.5 inches of rain each month in the average English summer. So in which story does Watson make a point of commenting upon an umbrella? Is it A, in The Hound of the Baskervilles, when Holmes and Watson form impressions of Dr. Mortimer from the umbrella and galoshes he leaves behind in Baker Street? Is it B, in The Priory School, when the Duke of Holderness clasps his hands tightly over the ivory head of his umbrella, launching into an impromptu version of Singing in the Rain? Or is it C, in The Five Orange Pips, when John Openshaw arrives in Baker Street with a long, shining waterproof and a streaming umbrella, which tells of the fierce weather through which he had come?
I'm going to hazard a guess that it's not B, but that still leaves me with A and C. And I'm guessing because you seem to be a bigger fan of The Hound of Baskervilles that it is A.
No, it is actually C. It is C. John Openshaw had to battle his way through the storm coming from Waterloo Station. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Holmes and Watson formed an impression of Dr. Mortimer based on the walking stick that he left behind, that his dog had left teeth marks in. So, well, you're okay. You're 1-1. That means we're right down to the wire here with number 3. So this is your opportunity to do well, to win a prize from the great big iHose grab bag of gifts. iHose GBGB. So there's no pressure at all. In the movie The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Basil Rathbone's disguised Sherlock Holmes sang of being beside the seaside. But in the canon, Holmes and Watson never seem to enjoy the seashore. However, which one of their cases begins on the beach? Is it A, in The Blue Carbuncle, when Watson interrupts Holmes contemplating a straw beach hat? B, in Black Peter, when Holmes investigates the murder of Captain Peter Carey, who is killed in his ship's cabin and left like a beached whale? Or C, in The Lion's Mane, when Holmes meets Harold Stackhurst while walking along the cliff path with a steep descent to the beach?
I was even going to read The Blue Carbuncle this morning and ran out of time. I could have told you with certainty which that was.
Well, you know what time of the year The Blue Carbuncle took place.
I do not.
That was the Christmas story, right?
Oh, that's right. Okay, so I'm going to hazard another wild guess that it is C.
You would be correct.
Oh, good.
That is when, of course, Holmes came in touch with the Lion's Mane jellyfish there down in the beach on the Sussex seaside. So, well done, sir.
It was complete and utter luck on my part.
Well, so much of life and so much of the Sherlockian movement is. So, pleased that you were part of this, and we will get your gift off to you post-haste.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to start reading the canon again, so I'm ready for next time.
I'm glad we could inspire. That can mean only one thing. What is it again?
It means that it's time to wind up the gramophone.
Woo, woo, wind up your radio, Dementites and Dementoids. No, of course, that means it's time for the editor's gas lamp. And, try as we might to find a summer-themed a summer-themed gas lamp. We were flummoxed. We were stopped dead in our tracks.
Gobsmacked.
To find nary a mention of warmer weather in the entire string of the Baker Street Journal, at least the EBSJ. So, we are turning to another source entirely. And this is, of course, the Sherlock Holmes Prayer by Christopher Morley, which was first given at the Baker Street Irregulars special dinner in 1944, the March 31st, 1944 dinner, where 3 publications were brought to light. And in the introduction of the prayer, Edgar Smith in a Baker Street four-wheeler says, "This orison was composed by the Gasogene and Tantalus for delivery at the dinner given to the Baker Street Irregulars at the Murray Hill Hotel in New York on March 31st, 1944, in celebration of the publication that day of 3 new books about Sherlock Holmes. It has heretofore appeared in print only in the form of a folder, distributed on the occasion to enlighten the lay brethren present and to facilitate the antiphonal responses." And by the way, those 3 books were Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, a textbook of friendship, edited by Christopher Morley; The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes, edited by Ellery Queen; and Profile by Gaslight, an irregular reader about the private life of Sherlock Holmes, edited by Edgar Smith. And now, here to read that poem is Christopher Morley himself.
Grant me, O Spirit of Reason, matter for deduction, intuition, and analysis. Plenty of 3-pipe problems that I may avoid the cowardice of 7% cocaine, or at least substitute something a little special in white wines. Give me newspapers, telegrams, and the grind of carriage wheels against the curb, the meditative breakfast at morning, the unexpected client in the nighttime, and occasionally the alerting word grotesque. Strengthen me, not to astonish the good Watson merely for theatrical pleasure, yet always to be impatient of unmitigated bleat, and of guessing, which rots the logical faculty. If, in hours of duress, neither the Turkish bath, nor medieval charters, nor my scrapbooks, nor my fiddle avail to soothe, turn my attention to the infallible reactions of chemistry, or to that rational and edifying insect, the bee. Remind me that there is a season of forgiveness for misfortune, but never for the incredible imbecility of bunglers from Lecoq to Lestrade. In all the joys of action, let me not forget the intellectual achievements of lethargy, to wit, Mycroft, and, slightly less to wit, Moriarty. Burden me not with unrelated facts, but encourage the habit of synthetic observation, collating the distinctions between the various. As the hand of the linotyper is to that of the cork-cutter, so are the types of the Morning Mercury to those of the Yorkshire Post. Remember, O Spirit, to segregate the Queen, viz., the fair sex is Watson's department. For me the mind is all, but one confession in remembrance. The pistol-shot initials on the sitting-room wall were not what Watson thought. In the name of that gracious lady, my favorite letters were the last 2. I was writing not VR, but IA. The Baker Street Underground shook my aim. Hold fast the doctrine. When all impossibles are eliminated, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Then, O Spirit, be the game afoot.
Amen. Amen, I say. That's. I don't think that prayer is resuscitated nearly enough.
No, boy, I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah, it's worthwhile. Lots of great stuff from Morley's pen over the years.
Oh, boy.
Really, just a masterful writer. I mean, we give a lot of due credence to Smith and his editorials and his writing in the Baker Street Journal, but boy, oh boy, you just can't beat some good Morley.
No, you can't. And if you can find a copy, this appears in other places, but it's also in the Standard, as Scott mentioned, but it's also in the Standard Doyle Company, Christopher Morley on Sherlock Holmes, which was edited by Stephen Rothman and published by the Fordham University Press as long ago as 1990.
Yeah. I think you can still find copies on ABE Books and eBay and places like that. It's summertime, and they say the living is easy. Whether you're inside your study, lounging on a beach chair, or perhaps just watching the sunset from your porch swing with a glass of ice-cold lemonade in your hand, we live in a time when you can enjoy the summer issue of the Baker Street Journal. Just arrived from the publishers, the summer 2016 issue is frighteningly good, beginning with the cover. But have no fear. There's more to the BSJ than the cover. Inside, Jamie Mahoney looks at estrangement in the canon, while Nick Dunn Meinel wonders if Holmes was part of a cover-up in the Abbey Grange. Catherine Cook takes us on a journey through illustrated versions of The Hound of the Baskervilles. And since it's baseball season, Mark Alberstadt writes about Conan Doyle and baseball. What does baseball have to do with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? Well, you'll have to subscribe to find out. Cartoons, stories from collectors, travelogues, a list of books and publications you'll want to check out. These and more are all part of the regular updates you can expect to see in the Baker Street Journal. The days are getting shorter as the summer comes to an abrupt end. We long for the leisurely evenings after dinner when we can still take a stroll in the evening light, whether it's along a beach, near a lake, through a meadow, or just around our own little neighborhood. It's a reflective time when we lament the things we meant to do or long for the things we'd do again before the autumn sets in. When such a reflective mood strikes us, perhaps it's the perfect time to ask, why haven't I subscribed to the Baker Street Journal yet? Yes, why haven't you? Head over to BakerStreetJournal.com and correct that with a subscription today. Well, if you'd like to give us any feedback about the show, if you'd like to get in touch with us, get on over to ihearofsherlock.com. Leave a comment on ihose.co/ihose102, which is the URL for this show. Of course, you can reach us there also by clicking on the email button. Hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Tumblr, and all usual places. That telephone thing still works.
Oh, boy.
If you just punch out the numbers on that little slab of silicone and aluminum in your hand, it's 734-221-READ. That's 734-221-7323. If you leave us a voicemail, we may play.
We will. We love to hear your voice.
We just have to get the voicemails first. Yeah. We'll play it on the show.
Hey, what is, it's been a long time since we've mentioned this, but what is our CB radio frequency?
iHose. iHose 103.8.
Oh, good. On your CB
megahertz, dial. Yes. iHose is our handle, Rubber Ducky.
Breaker 19, this here's a Rubber Duck. You got a copy on me, Love Machine?
There actually was at one point a group started by Ron Fish for Sherlockian ham radio operators, believe it or not. Evidently inspired by the pig that was harpooned by Sherlock Holmes in Black Peter, bringing it full circle back to the summer.
Oh.
But anyway, if you would like to support the show in any way, like the incomparable Mary Miller.
Mary Miller.
Get on over to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or just hit that Become a Patron button on our homepage and show your support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere by giving whatever you can per episode. What is this show worth to you? I think we've all seen exactly what it's worth to you. Thank you very much.
It's 102. It's at least worth 102 pennies.
Maybe what it's worth to Bert and I. Maybe you could afford that. Well, whatever's in your heart, whatever's in your checkbook, just empty it all out onto us.
Yes, and you better hurry up or we're going to sick John Raby on you.
Well, in the meantime, while we sweat it out for the rest of the summer, I am Scott Monty.
Yes, you are Scott Monty. I knew that. Yeah, and I'm Bert Wolder.
How about that? How does that work?
It's amazing, isn't it?
We keep doing that.
And all of that despite string theory and parallel universes and the Large Hadron Collider. I can't figure it out.
Well, we'll keep doing that, and we'll keep being who we are. And until next time, we bid you...
Yes.
The
games
afoot!
Afoot!
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
That's interesting. Evidently, in 1957, the Saint Detective magazine ran a piece by J.D. Corrington called Baker Street Weather.
Oh, really?
A pleasant, rambling commentary on the predominant meteorological aspects of the saga.